Hi, I'm Mike Haduck, and today I'm going to do a video on things changed and how things have changed since I was in the masonry business. I got this little thing of my dad driving a truck. It was a 1951, 1953 Chevy, and I used to go in that truck with my dad, so I've been around a long time, over 70 years old, and I want to talk about some of the things that changed. I remember the old timers complaining about plywood because it was just basically coming out, and they were saying they should be using sheeting board. That plywood stuff, that ain't no good. And to a certain extent, they were right. You know, in those days there was no screw guns, until they came out with the Phillips heads and the batteries. They used to use the electric guns. There was no Sawzall. I remember when the Sawzall came out and everybody was going, wow, man, this is really neat. No nail guns, no staple guns. When you did a framing job, it was done by hand. When you did a roof, you did it by hand. You had certain hammers that you would use. There'd be a framing hammer, there'd be a roofing hammer. Guys would do that. There was no vinyl siding. I remember my dad telling me the first time someone in our town got aluminum siding, everybody said, that's no good. Lightning is going to hit it and it's going to blow that house up, and it never happened. And then everybody started using aluminum siding, and now they're using vinyl siding. I remember when they started using vinyl siding. There was no power washers, cement mixer. My dad did everything by hand, and I could say he did that up until about 1966 or so. And they'd have two pans laying side by side. This guy would have one mix ready to go and one mixed, and that was his job all day, to mix. And when my dad bought a cement mixer, the guy was worried. He thought he was going to lose his job. And they had a bet with him, and he said he could mix faster than the mixer, and he did. He went in there and he mixed faster than the mixer. So, and then he found out he wasn't losing the job. It was just something to make things go faster and easier. Power trowels. If we wanted any big power equipment, there was a guy next to my dad who worked in New York City for the Turner Construction Company. And if there was a power trowel or something they were going to get rid of, this guy was the mechanic, he would get it for my dad. He'd take the truck out and get it. And we were still using those power trowels up until I quit a few years ago. Diamond saws. There was no diamond saws. You had a carborundum blades, and they only go so deep. You go to a quarry, they're still chiseling everything out by hand. Diamond saws, when they first came out, I'd say in the 80s, the little ones like this, the 7-inch ones, they were $120 then. Now you could pick one up for $20. Big difference. Laser levels. There was no laser levels. When I was there, we'd still be looking through the eyepiece. But before me, and I remember it, my dad would carry a hose on the truck and be wrapped around, and in two ends have the water. You fill the hose with water and you go from one end of the cellar to the other end of the cellar, and that's how you knew you were exactly where you were, and that's still the most accurate today. I'll leave a description for that video. There was no zoning. That kind of came around, I'd say, in the late 60s, zoning. And you could understand it. When you go over to a place like California, and they have the earthquakes in 1910 and knocked half of the city down, and so they came out with building codes. And then up in the Northeast you have the frost, and then down here in Florida we got the hurricanes. Well, the zoning was they wanted you so far away from the next building so if a fire company comes they can get around the building. Before the zoning, everybody was up against Chicago. They dropped the lantern and half of the city burnt down. So I could go with zoning a little bit. There was no inspectors. There was no code officials. There's no licensing. Everybody in our town, in almost every block, someone was a carpenter or a plumber, and anybody could do it. I mean, the plumbers were still using lead. They were still melting the lead. I remember them melting the lead. And then they got into soldering, and then they got into, now it's PEX pipes. So things really changed there. And all these guys were born in the Depression era. And they'd save every board and every nail And it was amazing. The plasterers would build their scaffolds outside the house with wood scaffolding. There was no metal scaffolding unless you were on a union job or something. They'd use double-headed nails, and they'd put the whole scaffold up against the building. They'd put it up just as fast as you could put any metal scaffold down. I mean, they knew how to do it. And then the double-headed nails, you'd pull it out and you'd reuse the scaffold, and you could make it go like those old Victorian buildings. You could make that scaffold go anywhere you want. And even when I was in China, you see my videos on China, they're still making it out of bamboo. So the metal scaffolding is basically a new thing. Concrete, there was no 4,000 or 3,000 pound mix. You call up the company and you'd say, I want a 1-2-3 mix. That's 1 Portland, 2 sand, 3 rock, or a 1-2-2 mix, or a 1-3 mix, whatever you wanted. They'd bring it to you that way. There was no 4,000 pound or 3,000 pound. The cinder blocks, you know, everybody had a cinder block or a cap. Now they're CMUs, concrete masonry units. And they change the name to everything. Like you'd go up to the gravel pit and you'd say, well, I want pea gravel. You know, usually we go up to the old mining pit and we get the mine rock, and we would use that instead of gravel. But it used to be pea gravel, chestnut, this or that, and now it's 1B, it's 2A, it's 2C. They changed the names to everything. It's like newspaper. Used to be the paper boy. Now he's the delivery specialist. He used to be the garbage man. Now he's a sanitation engineer. Used to go to the junkyard. Now it's the salvage yard. So everything keeps changing. And the old timers didn't want to waste any money hiring a backhoe. They dig it by hand. And you could go down to the store, and I think you still could to a certain amount of time ago. You go down to the lumber yard and get a quarter stick of dynamite. They hit a stump, they put a quarter stick of dynamite, ba-boom. Loosen the stump up, they'd pull it out with the truck. If you're a farmer, you'd pull it out with the horses. And that was it. You know, there was no rental centers. If you didn't have the cash and you didn't own it, you didn't have it. If you borrowed it, or you hire a subcontractor, there was no rental centers. Another thing was sheetrock. I didn't see sheetrock until about 1977. Everything else was a plasterboard. You know what I mean? They're a plaster guy. They'd come in with the bags of cement and the mixer. They'd plaster that whole house. You know, even my dad when he was remodeling, and I'd say that was in the 60s, there's no sheetrock. You didn't fix anything with sheetrock or spackle. It was you'd have to hire a plaster guy unless you did it yourself. So there's a lot of things that changed in masonry, and the reason I'm doing this video is because I get a lot of letters. Oh, I remember when I worked with my grandfather and he did this, and I remember when I worked with my uncle Jake and he did that, and all that stuff, because everybody was a mason, everybody was a carpenter, everybody was a mechanic. You know, there was no cars where you had to take it into there was a mechanic. You didn't take it into some electronic specialist. You had a carburetor, you had a distributor, standard shift, rolled down windows, and that's it. That's all it had to be something. It was either spark or gas. Everybody could go to a junkyard and get a car. As long as you had compression and it was in timing, you were good. Today's cars, it's almost ridiculous. Like another thing, I gotta do a video on inspectors and code officials, and you got to do that separately because I got a lot of things to say about that. I don't have a lot of trust for them. You know, there's a lot of good old boy stuff in it, but nobody's going to tell you that you can't do something on your property back in the day. These are all World War I, World War II, Korean guys. You can go on a property and say you can't do that. It just didn't happen. Everybody had their own vegetable garden. You know, they had turkeys. I had chickens running across the yard. The neighbor had an outhouse up until about 1965. They even didn't have a septic tank. The one drilled down to the mines, and when it blocked up, they put a quarter stick of dynamite up. Boom! Open it up again for a couple years. And everybody was like still primitive. Deer season was deer season, you know. Canning season was canning season. You prepared a year ahead for everything you were going to do, and what you worked for was for what you needed. You planned a year ahead. There was no, you didn't even have to have car insurance up until the late 60s. You know, you didn't have to have licensings. You didn't have to have, you know, workman's comp. I don't know when that came in. You didn't have to have, you know, they come out with all the new taxes and this and that and the other thing. And it really put a damper on people being able to do stuff themselves. I mean, we got today the channels that come out where everybody is doing their own fixing and their own remodeling, and I'm glad for that. So I'm going to have to say something about that and take you through that whole process and how that all developed and what it is today. So I just thought I would do something like this, say what things changed for me. You know what I mean? I remember they were still digging it by hand, you know, like I said, and they put a quarter stick of dynamite up, boom, big rock or whatever they had to move. If they hit a big rock, they dig a big hole next to it and push the rock in and then just keep going. Footers, there was no concrete trucks up until, I don't know, maybe the 30s, the 40s. They were still laying everything on the ground just like they built the old castles, or laying it on rock. Filling out a contract was rare unless you were doing a commercial job or somebody didn't know who you were. And there was no inspectors, like I said. Everybody had relatives. And if you were not known in the area, they all knew whether you were doing a good job or a bad job. And you'd hear about it. I remember an old guy standing on top of a bank looking down at my dad building a cellar. Said there's real no masons left anymore, because the old guys were building cathedrals and those old churches, and we were building stuff out of block, and now they just got concrete things where they come in and set it on the gravels, and it changed. So in some instances they're right, you know, they don't really do quality work anymore. Everything's fast and cheap and inexpensive. So you never heard anybody suing anybody. That was almost unheard of. Everybody kept right to where the contract was or where you had to be. Now you drive down the road, you've seen a sign, I can get you this much money and I can get you that much money. And a lot of morals are lost today, the way compared to what it used to be. If you were looking for a job, you never go on the internet or LinkedIn, or you had to have a schooling or something. You go down Litzy's bar at 5 o'clock where all the contractors were. And one guy might be doing roofs, one guy might be doing, you know, framing, another guy might do the masonry. And if you're short of work or somebody, tile work, electricians, yeah, I could use a hand for a day. You'd get your jobs that way. You get down there at 5 o'clock, by 6 o'clock, half of them be lit up. Yeah, you're going to get a job. You know, there was no, they didn't have OSHA back in them days. I was out in Jersey. I remember this, and I wasn't watching. I was there, but I wasn't watching the thing happen. And this OSHA guy came, and he wanted the guy to come down off the roof. I guess for whatever reason. The guy says, no, I ain't coming down. He's like, I'm going to fine you if you don't come down. The guy says, I'm my own boss, and if I jump off this roof and I kill myself, I'm going to blame it on you. You can't tell me what to do. And I think the guy left. So there wasn't anything like that. You know, nobody was going to stop you from working. You know, you went to a town, nobody cared if you worked. Everybody knew if somebody was wrong or something was wrong, the police or someone have to get you. But it wasn't as bad as it is now. So that's it. Just another little crazy thing to come up with. I'm Mike Haduck. I'll see you next video. Let me know what you think.